Right. See if you get on to ask any questions. Okay, so we've got 2 people watching so far. Chris Schmidt. How do the coupled information elements complement each other? How does introverted logic complement extroverted ethics and vice versa? Okay, so this is something I've put quite a bit of thought into because, well, when I first started looking at Socionics, all you really had were the reigning dichotomies. You had what reigning said was merry versus serious. Now, when I looked at the descriptions of merry versus serious, it wasn't particularly helpful. It wasn't clear exactly how it could, the definitions he gave, which are very specific and very behavioralist, could be derived from valuing introverted logic and extroverted ethics. It certainly wasn't explained. So this is something I'd had to give a lot of thought to myself, try and come up with more likely and more accurate definitions, at least what can be deduced from what we know about introverted logic and what we know about extroverted ethics, what they have in common. And by valuing them, by valuing one, you necessarily value the other. So what is that common thread they have? And I came up with the idea of, well, actually, I'm not sure I came up with the idea. One of my past acquaintances called Estrevex or Roan, he came up with the idea of source flexibility and source integrity, I think it was, and I did a spin-off of that, and I tried to come up with the terms of essentially clarity seeking versus integrity seeking. Now, clarity seeking, that is what I think valuing extroverted ethics and introverted logic causes you to value. The seeking of clarity. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you think about extroverted ethics, what is extroverted ethics? It's, well, the main focus is about the communication of one's emotional states. It's very much a communicative information element. The idea is that emotions are to be expressed, to be shared. So what's the clarity? It's the clarity of that emotional expression. It's the reason why people place extroverted ethics as an opposite to extroverted logic, whereas extroverted logic has this tendency to be very much about factual accuracy. Extroverted ethics goes in the other direction. It tends to exaggerate on the facts. Now, why would something exaggerate on the facts? What is the virtue of exaggeration? And I'd say it's clarity. It's making sure that your emotional states are communicated as clearly as possible, that people get the message, usually via A very could be loud, or could be very enthusiastic, or some very clear and absolute emotional expression. So that's the clarity of extroverted ethics. What about the clarity of introverted logic? Well, when we think about logical clarity, well, we're talking about two opposites here. You have introverted logic versus extroverted logic. And extroverted logic tends to be quite messy. It's sort of like the analog. It's collecting the data however it appears to work in reality. When you look at introverted logic, it's very different to that. Its ways of framing reality are almost pristine. Why is it pristine? Because it's taken out the things which contradict. It tries to draw patterns in the different data points. It tries to find the best way of connecting up all the different points in the most consistent manner, without outliers and things which disrupt that internal consistency. Now, that means it's very clear. It means that when you think of something that's framed in a very consistent way, it means that your understanding has that clarity. It doesn't have lots of messy bits that muck up the perfect structure, the perfect rule, the perfect principle. So in that regard, again, it's a pursuit of clarity, and logical clarity rather than emotional clarity. So yes, that's why I would say the couple information elements of introverted logic and extroverted ethics have. They share that clarity. Now, in terms of complementing, well, one, they're sharing in that value of clarity, and whereas one brings that sense of logical clarity, so understanding clearly one's priorities, what's important, what makes logical sense. So for instance, extroverted ethics types, they tend to have difficulty articulating their many different thoughts and emotions in some sort of clear structure that makes a sort of absolute or clear sense. So they benefit from that introverted logic. At the same time, those who are introverted logic oriented, yes, they're very good at setting out their ideas in a very sort of clear structure, but they're not very good at getting the sort of emotive message across in a very clear manner. They're not good at communicating some sort of inspiring or engaging message. So in that sense, both of them complement each other. Communication, but also clarification. Okay, random name 2298. How is a socionics type formed? How much is it biological and environmental? I don't know. That is a question which I would like to find out the answer to, but you need a lot of research. I mean, one, you need to clearly find a way of measuring a socionics type as some sort of entity, and in order to see what contributes to its formation and what may hinder its formation or not contribute to its formation. So that's one challenge there which we haven't managed to solve or fix. The other thing is then to see how much of it is biological, how much is environmental. That's always very difficult. You could use identical twin experiments. That can give you a sense of what's biological versus environmental. One thing I'd have wanted to do in the past, I tried paying people I tried to give people discounts on diagnostic interviews for this, is if they were identical twins, and that way I could see, are they actually the same type? Because if they are the same type, then that would be a strong support for the idea that socionics is biological rather than environmental. At the same time, at least anecdotally, I could say that when I was very young, before I had made my environmental factors, my socionics type was already reasonably clear, even as a 3-year-old. Even then, you could still say that there's certain environmental impacts. So I'm not sure, is my answer. I don't know, to be sure. My hunch is that a great deal of it is biological, but to actually qualify that hunch, I still need to see what genes turn it on, what contributes to it, what combinations of genetics are needed for there to be a certain socionics type. If it's the case it's biological, not environmental. I just think it sort of makes sense, because if you accept there is development within a type, usually based on one's experiences, it makes sense that the actual type itself is something other than what's created by experiences. Or it could be, like a midway theory, there could be a point very early in a child's development, after all genetics are sorted out, but in that very early stage of development where these things start to set, maybe in the first year, maybe. So I'm not sure. I don't know yet. And then Randall says, to be more specific, how is a person's information metabolism formed? Okay, so when we use information metabolism, it's like a metaphor for, well, it's a metaphor for energy metabolism. So the digestive process is how we turn information into our behaviors and our actions. It's a transformative process. So that's yes, information metabolism is that transformative process. But to actually understand how information metabolism itself is, well, how is it formed in a person? Again, I don't know. It's a theory. It's a metaphor for the energy metabolism, food into energy. But I wouldn't be able to say that it's something actually able to pinpoint out in particular neurological functions in the brain. It could be. I think there is a good argument to be made that the brain does, one, take in information, two, analyze that information, three, form decisions, and four, actually make, well, actually tell the muscles in the body to actually carry out whatever decision is made. Now, does that mean that, does it mean that information metabolism actually has some clear mechanism, or is it already part of pre-existing neurological patterns, neurological structures which people have already studied? I think it's more likely the latter. And if it's the latter, well, for me to answer your question of how is a person's information metabolism formed, I'd say we'd have to study the development of the brain, which is something which scientists are already doing, have been doing for decades. So I think it's a question of just looking at the research and thinking, right, research suggests that these aspects of the brain these parts of the brain do these particular functions, if you look at it in sort of a modular way, in which case you could say, okay, if these parts of the brain are doing these particular functions, they say these are the parts taking in the information, these parts are analyzing, etc., etc. And then essentially your answer will be information metabolism is formed in a way that the brain is formed and does these different processes. So I wouldn't say that's the clearest answer, but I'd say the science already has these processes in place, or describes these processes. Information metabolism is just a way of summarizing and theorizing on these biological processes. So are there any other questions? Okay, Chris says, do you believe that unhealthy people often do not use their ego block and use their superego block or hidden agenda instead because they feel like they can't express their ego blocks in their environment? I wouldn't say that's how it works. I would say that it's probably quite difficult for someone to suppress their ego block. It is a point of confidence. It is a point which someone understands the right situation to use it in. That's what a strong a strong function is. So I wouldn't say that some sort of decide not to use their ego block. Rather, they be assessing for the best situations and times through which to make it apparent and use it. At the same time, when it comes to the leading function specifically, that's not even situational. It's sort of consistently on. It's consistently that paradigmatic. That's consistently that paradigm through which we make sense of the world around us. It's consistently on as that lens. So even if we're not if we're trying to sort of tone it down in our behaviours, which I think could be quite difficult if it's so fundamental to how you view the world, even if you may be trying to do that, you'd still be viewing the world through it, to still be a major for cognitive lens. So I wouldn't say that you can simply just stop using your ego block like that. Maybe you can turn down your creative function more. That's more situational. Even then, it would be pretty tricky because it does flavour your use of your leading function. What I would say is that there are certain block shifts depending on the environment, depending on how confident you are in it, depending on your health, as it were. For instance, probably the most well-known block shift would be between the super id and the id. Now, why is this? The id is something which you don't value. It's something which you are very good at, however. So it's something you sort of take for granted. Whereas the super id is the opposite in that respect. It's something which you aren't so good at, but which you do value, something which you do see as important. So what does that mean? What would be the dynamic? People, when they're not so confident, would rest back on their demonstrative function, an ignoring function, but to a lesser degree, because it's the ignoring function. It tries to minimize its use. And then, as they grow in confidence, they'll start to venture out into the super id block, mostly in terms of their mobilizing function. So what you usually see is a shift from the demonstrative function to the mobilizing function. And what they'll do is they'll try to assert their ability in this area, and it may easily become overweening, and it may easily become hubristic, and that's when a mistake will be made. They won't be able to adjust their use of it to new situations appropriately, and after said humiliation or failure, whatever it is, they're likely to then fall back again on the demonstrative function, because that's safe. You don't value it, you don't see it as important, but you'll take it for granted. It'll be there when you need it. So that answers your question. Random name 2298. Have you ever noticed a similarity of parents typing to their children? Anecdotally, both my parents and myself are ethical types. I've noticed some cases where parents and children are identicals. For instance, my mum and my sister, I'd say, are identicals, EIEs. But, again, that's anecdotally, so, it's just one of my observations. But I can't say that is any sort of prevalence or any sort of rule. One, I don't have the data, and two, I've seen many families where there is no identical. And if that's the case, I wouldn't say necessarily is some clear pattern. That speaks back to the genetics question, really. If type is genetic, then why isn't it almost always inheritable? I have met some people online who do believe it's inheritable. But they believe that, if not your parents, that at least one of your grandparents will almost definitely, must have the same quadra as you. And there's very little evidence for that. I have no reason to think that's actually what happens. Um, but yeah, I say I haven't. I've seen similarities. I've seen cases of identity between parent and child, but I haven't seen an ongoing pattern of that happening. Can you give examples of non-political manifestations of beta values? Well, I do find that we do tend to focus too much on the idea of betas as being political ideologues. I think it's a distortion of how betas are in day-to-day life, which isn't necessarily going to be so political. I know examples of people who aren't political are betas, like for instance, even my family members aren't that political, but still betas. So, non-political manifestations. You can see it in more extroverted sensation types in terms of materialism, in terms of wanting to be around um, people of special belongings, special groups, even exclusive groups. People want to go to like the best clubs, to hang around with the people who have things going for them, who are going on the right sort of journey. So that could be an example. The beta value isn't political. The lack of interest in hanging out with just sort of day-to-day people, or people who are talk about trivial things, unimportant things, things which don't really matter. Other beta values are the idea that, well, the pursuit of some sort of journey or some sort of path in life doesn't have to be a political path. It doesn't have to do anything with actually trying to change the world politically or structurally. It could simply be about finding your own journey and your own meaning in life. And, of course, limiting out alternative possibilities to that meaning, and again, not just spending time with anyone for the sake of anything, but for the sake of something that is important and matters. And also you find beta values people not for political reasons, but just for the sake of just preserving a sense of order or structure in their life. They could become administrators, they could become police officers, they could even become bouncers at a club. I talk about more LSI sorts of people, where they just want to find a job which has clear structure, clear rules, things they can enforce, things they won't do wrong. In the pharmacy, an LSI would do very well in that, completely non-political. But the idea of having structures and maintaining and enforcing those structures very clearly and absolutely. So yeah, there are plenty of non-political examples of beta, and I'd say that the majority of betas are not going to be politically oriented. Same with the majority of anyone in any quadra is not going to be too politically oriented. They have other things going on in their lives. I think the reason why we focus so much on betas as political is simply because it's the political ones which end up floating to the top of our awareness. We see them in the media all the time. We see them talking, making comments. And so as a result, they become overly represented compared to everyone else. Okay, Chris says, do you always use your demonstrative functions as a channel for your creative function? And if yes, couldn't this irritate your dual, as it is their painful element? Well, I would say that... it's a good question. I would say that the creative function is situational. It's a situational function. It can usually switch on and off. Whereas the extroverted logic... Well, sorry, I'm talking about extroverted logic. For me, it would be extroverted. The demonstrative function is actually quite consistently on, even if it's only in the background. So I could say that the extroverted logic could end up being used even when you're not engaging with your introverted logic, simply working in the background, not really paying attention to it. So yeah, I think hypothetically you could use a demonstrative function, not purely as a channel for your creative function. But I do think that dynamic exists much of the time. And if yes, couldn't this irritate your duals as their painful element? No, I wouldn't say so. The thing about the demonstrative function is that it's not placed with the same emphasis as a valued function. There's no expectation on the other person. There isn't judgment of the other person based on its valued dictates, its valued parameters. And as a result, I don't think that your dual is going to feel particularly oppressed by your use of it. That's the idea. It's a supportive in the background thing. It's not an oppressive use. Besides, it's also important to keep in mind that your dual is going to have this as a vulnerable function. That means it's going to be more of a blind spot. They're not going to be paying much attention to it. What will be annoying for them is when people are trying to say you must pay attention to this particular thing, which isn't how the demonstrative function is used. So yeah, you can use a demonstrative function as much as you want, as long as using it as a demonstrative function. And it shouldn't irritate your dual in that way. Now, saying that, you may find situations where, for instance, you're using that information element to an excess due to a certain situation, and your dual may be unable to keep up because you're using it so much. Good example, I find that if I overload my girlfriend with factual information, that could be hard for her. So, in that respect, yes, she'll be able to tell me, oh, it's too much information, I gotta, I can't take this all in. In which case, say, okay, I'll stop telling you all this factual information, and then it's fine. There's no judgment from me for that, because it's not something which I see as particularly important that someone is taking in factual information all the time and continuously updating and changing how they work. I don't have that sort of irritation if someone is unwilling to take on those roles, those ways of life. Do you always use your creative for the sake of your base function, or can it be used for the sake of the element itself? Well, it is a valued element, so it's appreciated for itself. I think that is important to keep in mind. But, at the same time, it is a producing function. So it is valued and appreciated for itself, but when it is used, it is to serve the needs of a leading function. Usually your creative function is not something that actually produces needs, it produces the solutions to those needs. So I wouldn't say that, well, I don't know how to think of an example. If someone, say an ILE, for instance, uses introverted logic for the sake of introverted logic. No, I think it is possible. I have an example myself when I've seen something which is logically inconsistent, and I like to point it out. Probably based on the fact that it's logically inconsistent. But at the same time, how can I really be sure? Because it might very well be that the reason I'm pointing out that logical inconsistency is because for some great possibility to be realized, for new ideas to be opened up, new ways of looking at the world to be opened up, I'd need things to be consistent. So it's hard to tease out the intrinsic from the extrinsic, from the instrumental. It's really hard to tease that out in one's motivations. I'm not sure if we have that level of self-awareness. I'd have to think about it more. Cat P. How can I lean on my extrovert sensation less when dealing with my semi-duality? Where's your accent from? It's reasonably middle-class, Londonish accent. How do I lean on SE less and dealing with my semi-duality? Okay, Cat P. Oh, hang on. Cat P. EIE. Right. Okay. Now that's going to be... It's going to be tricky, because in a way it's your mobilizing function. It's something which you're going to want to, make use of, to assert... Oh yeah, you said it. EILII, yeah. So I had to think about it for a second, Cat. It's something you're going to want to grow in and use, especially when you're developing, especially when you're trying to grow as a person. So it's going to be, a bit tough having to rein that in. At the same time, that's not something which is impossible, because it is a situational information type as an element. It's something you can sort of switch off. But of course, let's think of it this way. What causes someone to switch things on and off based on situation? What decides that? What decides that appropriateness? It will be the leading function. So, for an EIE, leading function is extroverted ethics. So it's your emotions which are deciding whether to use force and aggression or not. So, I guess the question is this. What is the LII doing to upset you, to make you angry, to make you essentially resort to using that more aggressive approach? And it's a question of thinking, okay, I'm having these emotions. How can I, one, I do need to rant. I do need to get those emotions off my chest, something which EIEs need to, you can't tell them in the EIE not to express their emotions. That's going to be difficult for them. It's going to be very oppressive for them. They need to be able to express their emotions. So it's how can I express those emotions in a way that's clear, but in a way that doesn't make the LII feel unsafe. Doesn't make the LII feel that, they're being forced to do something which they wouldn't want to do. That they are, having essentially their principles threatened. So, I wouldn't say SE is something you should lean on. And you say, how can I lean on my extrovert sensation more? I wouldn't say that's something which... Your mobile function is really a crutch. It's something which you try to do because your growth in it builds your esteem. What you'd lean on more would be extrovert intuition, which offers perhaps a solution here. If you can think about how to, still express your emotionality, but not engage that force and intensity on the person, not to intimidate the other person. You could instead try and think of other ways, alternative ways of expressing it. You could try to make your emotional expression more inclusive. Include the LII in the emotions you're feeling, and get them to understand your point of view. Try to make sure that there's something which there isn't a confrontation that needs to be involved here. It's rather you have your emotions, you need to express those emotions, and you need to then understand each other's points of view. So we see it in that way. If you engage your extrovert intuition more, which the LI will be far more amenable to in extrovert sensation, you should be able to bridge that gap. I hope that helps. You say you can understand him, he can understand you. Okay. So, now when there's a gap in understanding between two people, well, one, this isn't necessarily a socionics asymmetricality. It's not that you're in an asymmetric relation. Semi-duality is a symmetrical relationship. So instead, the gap may be one, your greater people skills may be, or your greater socionics knowledge. In which case, it's a question of making sure that how your feeling is communicated clearly, but in a non-intimidating way. And then, once you have that emotional expression, you then need to be able to explain to the LI what you're feeling, why you're feeling. You need to understand the why behind what you're feeling. And maybe that can bridge that understanding. Maybe it's a question of sitting down, maybe at a time when you're not angry. I would find with VIEs, when they get angry, there's no point talking to them if you don't want to fight when they're angry. There's no point. They need to get the emotions off their chest, and they're going to choose the confrontational ways of doing it. There's no point of trying to have a more chilled conversation. You can't just ask them to calm down. They won't like it. So instead, what I would say is this. When you have calmed down at your own time, when you find yourself in this position when you're no longer feeling so angry, then you can bring that conversation up again with the LII. Talk about why you were made to feel the way that you felt. And maybe in that more sober time, you'll be able to reach some sort of clarity with the LII. Hope that helps. Oh, he thinks I'm ENTJ or ESTP subtype. Well, I'm not sure about the subtype idea. I'm not sure you can have another type as your subtype. Other people have suggested this, but I'm very skeptical of the idea. Yeah. What do? You say you explain with him. As in, you wait until you're more calm, and then you try to explain why you get upset. Is that what you mean? So Cat's saying I do that. Then he doesn't get it, and then I get pissed. Okay, Cat. What we'll do is we'll talk more about this off the Q&A, because other people want to answer questions. We'll talk about it later. I've got to answer more questions first. Random name 2298. From your experience, are there certain dual pairings have a harder time getting along? Yes. Because what is getting along? Getting along is having harmonious relationships. So that already suggests a degree of introverted sensation. Can be introverted ethics as well, but not necessarily. But in definite introverted sensation, the idea of getting along is important. So I'd find that alpha dual pairings are probably going to have the easiest time getting along. Deltas may have difficulties because they have quite high standards for each other, and they may not find the right person so easily. But once they get into the groove of it, I think they also are good at getting along for very long periods of time. But when it gets to things like betas and gammas, well, gammas, if something goes wrong, well, that could be it. It'll be hard to repair. With betas, there may be lots of fights, lots of challenges, but that's often part of what makes beta work, because they believe in that passion, they believe in caring about something so much that you're willing to fight over it. So, yeah, in terms of getting along, that itself is not going to be promised by duality. Rather, what is promised by duality is the relationship which is most conducive to your values. So yeah, getting along is a particular example of that, but not something which you'll see with all quadras. And then there's certain situations where, even regardless of duality, you still won't have a good relationship, regardless of it being getting along or having more of a combative one. For instance, if you have two betas who have very different ways of viewing the world, I'll go back to political manifestations, but okay, they're so easy to pick from the list of examples. But say Stalin and Trotsky, Stalin and Trotsky bumped off because they had a conflict over their ideology. So yeah, there are other things also go into it for making duels more like to fall out. And I would say that whereas alphas are more peacekeeping, so if there is an issue, they wouldn't hang on to it, they wouldn't turn it into a grudge as much. Gammas and betas, they may hang on to those grudges more. Chris Schmidt, how can you identify if someone is an extrovert sensation ego type when they're not like the stereotypical tough and confrontational type of person? Well, the most often examples will be with a creative function. Now, that's the thing. There are two main ways of seeing extrovert sensation. The leading function the energy is very obvious. They're very obviously taking charge, very obviously dominating their environment. They've got that overpowering energy to them, so very quite clear to see. When it comes to the creative function, it's not going to be so obvious. Instead, it's going to be more subtle. I would say that, nevertheless, you can often see who are the LSIs and ESIs. There's a certain tenacity to them, a certain steeliness, which you can easily pick out when you're talking to them. There's something about their manner and their bearing. They're not trying to take over the entire room the same way extrovert sensation leading would be, but you know that you won't be able to move them from the place in which they're standing, and you should never try. You'll get a good beating. So that's it. It's not an easy way to identify. It's something which, with experience, we're able to pick out quite easily. But there are certain techniques, like if you get the sense that whatever you're offering to them is not what they've decided that they want to talk about, want to focus on, and you get that sort of very clear pushback and a very authoritative shutdown, well, that could tell you quite easily that there's extrovert sensation likely in the creative function, especially with there being an absence of extrovert intuition there. Random name 2298. Is there any use in treating MBTI and Socionics as different, but using them both at the same time? For example, would 9FP-II be any different from 9FJ-IEI? I would say that there probably isn't any use. to be frank, I still hold to the view that MBTI does not offer anything which Socionics doesn't already offer, and better. As a result, once you find out your Socionics type and you're sure of it, you don't really need to even consider talking about your MBTI type. That's why when I'm talking about my video this morning about converting from MBTI to Socionics, I would never really I wouldn't say that I spend my time thinking about, oh, you know your Socionics type, now you've got to work out your MBTI type. I wouldn't see it working chronologically that way. Usually when people I haven't even met anyone who, after knowing about Socionics, has said, right, I've got to discover this MBTI and work out my type in the MBTI. I think once you go on to Socionics and at least you've developed some understanding of the theory, I can't see you going back to MBTI. So yeah, I don't see the utility of it. I see it more as a sort of a curiosity for someone who's just encountering the other theory and starting to cross the bridge, if they do ever make the jump across the bridge. Cat passion. Okay, there's essentially a blockage that happens. It's hard for my LI to understand me. Even if I walk away and come back later, he is constantly abstracting what I'm saying and missing my point. I have a very cookie-cutter semi-duality. I notice I get extremely irritable over the fact that he can't understand what I mean. So under activating my extra sensation, obviously I don't control it well. Yeah. Then with extra sensation vulnerable, he obviously gets extremely uncomfortable. We decide to let it go eventually, rinse and repeat. This has been a frustrating point with myself and a lot of extrovert intuition types, valuing types. So I'm more so looking at how to bridge the gap without having to unconsciously go into extrovert sensation bulldozer mode. It just sticks out the most with my semi-dual. Yeah, exactly. Its temper will rise quickly for EIEs. And you got to think about, is my temper right now going to be something which is constructive in my relationship with this LII? Or can I find a way to express that emotion, maybe away from the LII, and then when I'm calm, go back to them and explain how I felt, and explain why I felt that way, and try to reach some sort of agreement on how to not cause you to get angry or upset again. What is the problem? What are they doing that is wrong, and why does it make you feel that way? Now, if it's a question of the LII then not being able to understand what you're saying, but actually abstracts, then I think you need to make it as explicit and clear as possible without being aggressive or confrontational. So, what you could do, and I find this often is helpful, if you say what you mean, you say how you feel, and then you ask the LI to repeat back to you what they think you said. Now, if they then repeat back something which is completely different or so abstracted it's completely removed from what you actually are meaning, then you can say, no, that isn't exactly what I mean, and then you could try again, or you can correct exactly where there was the issue. And you work on that between yourselves. I know EIEs have difficulty with articulation, and the LI is very good at articulation. So you try and use the LI's ability to help with articulation to allow yourself to actually express yourself clearly to the LII. It's essentially something you've got to work on with each other, and you've got to develop that sort of technique whereby you can get around this issue of him not quite understanding what you mean, abstracting, and then you getting frustrated and then losing it, and then making the LII feel scared or uncomfortable. Yeah, Cap. Yeah. There's going to be that difficulty. I say, you got to, as soon as he starts saying something which is not what you said, you got to say, okay, no, that's not what I meant. You got to keep your calm when this happens, because you got to keep in mind that they are trying to understand what you're saying. They're not doing it from any sort of bad will. They're just trying to get an understanding. They're having difficulty in terms of the specifics. So it's going to be, it's going to be tough. But once you develop those lines of communication, you can develop that method. You got to keep. I know it's tough to keep calm. So what I would say is to, engage with your extrovert intuition. You've got good extrovert intuition. Use that to understand his perspective. I know that's not something you would like doing so much. I know your nature leads you to want to the extrovert sensation, but try to put it to one side for a bit. Don't worry, Kat. When people ask other questions, I'll answer their questions. Let's see if there's any others. No, there are no other questions so far. Don't worry, you're not hogging. The LI in question is here listening. Fantastic. Pleased to meet you, Ben. Okay, I have another ITR question now. I didn't get that abbreviation. Not in my vocabulary yet. Why do I not fill the supervisory position with anyone? In fact, I feel I supervise everyone. I expect there's something to do with my Enneagram type, but I don't know. Well, intertype relation. Gotcha. Thanks. Well, okay. One, I would say to treat these relationship descriptions with a lot of salt. And I say that because I'm very skeptical that anyone's very carefully deduced out the descriptions from the information elements in the Model A functions interacting with the information elements of someone else's Model A functions. That's a lot of deductive work to do. I don't think people have actually done that work. And even then, if they had done that work, that would only explain how it works in theory, clearly and articulately. It wouldn't necessarily show how it works in practice. There hasn't been any sort of laboratory research in terms of how one type interacts with another type, how hundreds of examples of one type interact with another 100 examples of another type. That would be a good empirical experiment. We don't have that. So take it with a pinch of salt. So if you say you do not feel the supervisory relationship with anyone, well, again, we're not sure that's exactly how it's meant to be. It should be described. It just has been described that way by some site you may have read. But okay, let's see if we can break down supervision as an intertype relationship. At least based on what we understand, based on the Model A, how should that work? Well, think of it this way. It's mainly characterized by the interaction of a leading function with a vulnerable function of a person. What does that mean? For you, leading function, Oh, sorry, hang on. Why don't I look for the supervisee position? Sorry. For you, it'll be your vulnerable function. It'll be their leading function. Okay. So the thing about supervision is this, and what people tend to get this, people actually tend to get this a bit wrong. The thing about it is that it's more felt by the other person, not by you. It's felt more by the supervisor than the supervisee. Why is that? Because one, the vulnerable function is a blind spot. It's not something you're going to pick out. It's not something you're going to care about very much. Meanwhile, yeah, exactly. You've always heard the opposite. But the point is, people don't tend to understand the vulnerable function. They think it's a source of pain. It's not. It's not really a source of pain. You don't care about it enough for it to be a source of pain. It's a source of cringe in other people watching you. People don't get that. Your source of pain is your suggestive function, because that's the thing which, yeah, that's the thing. Your suggestive function is going to be a source of pain, because that's something you care about, but you're not doing well in, you need help in. Your mobilizing function, if you try it out and then you muck up in it, again, that's going to be a source of pain. What's another source of pain? When you are supervising someone else, because there's something which you hold to be so important, your leading function, and someone else is not paying the slightest bit of attention to it. That is going to be the source of pain for you. Oh yeah, okay. Not having introverted sensation, well, having it as a vulnerable function, will be a source of pain in a different respect. In that, you know, you'll go through life easily causing yourself discomfort. At the same time, that's not going to be so much of a big deal for you, because you're not going to prioritize your comfort above other things. It's not going to be that much of a priority. I mean, it's not going to cause much psychological pain. Well, unless you talk about EI in their emotional states, carrying them off to certain extremes of emotional states, rather than sort of tempering it with sort of, you know, chillaxing, sort of embracing more positive emotions. In a way, EIs embrace that kind of pain. But in terms of that feeling of feeling oppressed by someone else, no, that's not what the vulnerable function is for. It's for you to basically, you're not going to pay any attention to it, and you're not going to be able to interact with it properly or do it appropriately. And it's other people who see it as important get frustrated with you for doing that. So who is your supervisor? Well, that's going to be the SLI, right? So the type which is taking the most asymmetric, one-sided issue with how you function is going to be a type which is not, which is actually quite conflict avoidant and tends to keep their problems to themselves, right? That SLI, conflict avoidant, keeps their problems to themselves. So a type like that is hardly going to try to put pressure on you to conform to introverted sensation. As a result, you'll find that EIEs do not tend to hear from their supervisors. It's all instead something which the supervisor has to deal with. Nutmeg Pluto. I'm LSI, which I understand to be your supervisee type. Do you have any insight on what this intertype relationship is like in particular? A close friend is Iley, and I wonder what it's like for him. Well, what I tend to find with, well, to be clear, I don't know that many LSIs. It's not the one I have very common interaction with. But I would say this, where there would be a difficulty of LSIs is where I want to explore some sort of possibility. I want to try to introduce an LSI to something which doesn't fall under their area of fixation or interest, and they'll try to shut it down. They won't want to explore that particular area. And when they do that, I'll find that frustrating, because they're not willing to give an alternative way of viewing something for time of day. They're not willing to look outside of a structure of it which they've created. They'll just dismiss it out of hand. So I don't like it when people dismiss things out of hand. I find that irritating. So that would be my frustration with LSIs, you could say. But at the same time, outside of this, and the thing people don't get about a supervisor is that, well, it's not going to be an ongoing source of confrontation or some sort of bad relationship. I've known supervisors to even get married. So You can have a supervision relationship, maybe even have a close friend with someone who's meant to be your supervisor. But there can be things which can be irritating at times, and that would be an example. But nevertheless, you're still sharing introverted logic and something which is valuing both work and introverted logic and bond on that. Even though you have different approaches, you have more of an extrovert intuition approach, you have more of an extrovert sensation approach. At the same time, when it comes to ILEs, and remember you're the one who's supervisee, they're the supervisor. ILEs are quite tolerant personalities. It's the extrovert intuition. So if it were the other way around, the LSI may be less willing to tolerate you. But if you're an ILE and you're with an LSI as a close friend, the ILE may put up with that difficulty more because they're extrovert intuition. They still want to explore that possibility as being a friend of yours. Now, what I should say though is when I'm talking about types and their relationships, do take it with a pinch of salt, simply because, one, again, these relationships aren't demonstrated or proven scientifically, and two, I cannot really be sure myself that you are indeed the types which you think you are. There's always going to be that margin of error which I can't account for, because I don't know any of you, at least not personally. So I'm simply giving you what I know about these types, not about you as people. Just something that's important to keep in mind. Ben says, to what extent are elements in the vital ring unconscious to us? Now that is a point of contention, because I know Alshra first set out the idea of, well, she didn't, it was Jung initially, but she borrowed from Jung, and so she took this idea of 4 being conscious, 4 being unconscious. Personally, I don't think it makes any sense. It just doesn't seem to reflect the reality I've observed. I've seen people, who talk about their id and their super-id. And if you're talking about your id and your super-id, if you're aware of it, that means it can't be unconscious. It can't fall outside of your consciousness. So I don't think that's a really good description of what people call the mental and vital. I've come up with a different name for it. I call it public and private. And I think that describes it better. What do I mean by public and private? I mean that your ego and your superego, these are your dealings with other people. Your ego, you try to bring out to others, you try to contribute to the world through your ego block. And your superego is sort of your struggle and your transactional relationship, your negotiations with the outside world, where they have certain demands they ask you to conform to. So both of those are public. Whereas the super-id, this is there of your own growth and development. It's not really for others, it's for yourself. In that regard, it's more private. And the id block, something which you don't value, you're not going to draw attention to other people, but you'd also fall back on it when it's needed. Again, I say it's a private. They're both private functions. So I actually have a bit of beef, as it were, with calling it conscious and unconscious. I don't think it reflects reality well. So I think it's something that had to be improved, had to be replaced, as it were. Chris Schmidt, when I, as an IEI, don't value introverted ethics, why do I get angry with some SLEs who have psychopathic behaviours because of their lack of it? Well, I mean, not all SLEs are going to be psychopathic. Important thing there. An extremity of SLE can show certain psychopathic behaviours. 2, IEIs can have morality. Well, most types can have morality. Any type can have morality. But the IEI, how they tend to formulate their morality, is usually based on introverted logic. They're less interested in terms of, the character or nature of a person. They're not so inclined to see that as important or based on emphasis on it, although they are going to be very clued into this. Rather, they'll make assessments of people based on how they fit into their journey of importance in life, the thing which grants them meaning, and their structured worldview, how they've made sense of a world, what they think are noble things or ignoble things, as it were. And they can form these views quite clearly. It won't be specific to the person, it won't be specific to the goodness of an individual. There'll be certain rules which everyone should, stick to because these are meaningful and right. So, if an IEI can formulate those, I'm not saying all IEIs do, but IIs do try to set out certain frameworks, certain structured ways of understanding. It's part of their growth. If a psychopathic behaviour is something which violates those structures, those understandings, then the IIs are probably going to get annoyed and want to get rid of it. You know, purge the reality of the psychopathic behaviour. So, yeah, it's perfectly, you know, reasonable to imagine II getting annoyed by psychopathic behaviour, but not doing it from an introverted ethics place. It's not about the character or nature of the person. It's that they are violating certain rules, certain understandings, certain ideals which you hold to be important. I think it's also worth keeping in mind that extroverted ethics does talk a lot about behaviour, how you are acting. And if you are acting in a way which is out of order, you know, that's going to be an extroverted ethics sort of judgment, because something which is disrupting certain mood. So, yeah, and that's not really talking about introverted ethics. It's not about your character, it's about your behaviour, different things. But it also means that usually extroverted ethics types, when the behaviour changes, they can be very more forgiving of the person because they've changed their behaviour. It's not about the character. I'm marrying an ILE in a few months. Benefactor is fun. I roll lol. Well, someone who actually was in a relationship with my beneficiary, so it would have been your type. I can. God, that brings back memories. Wow. Yeah, benefit is probably the most interesting of the intertype relationships, but also the most complex, which is probably what makes it interesting. Sure, Jan. How are you 100% sure of your type? I'm not. I am reasonably sure, probably more sure now of many other things, simply due to, you know, testing out whether it's right or not. Most people I meet believe I'm an ILE. They agree to me being that. It's a common opinion. And looking at that type, I'm thinking, what other type could I be? Could I be an EIE? Could I be an LIE? Could I be an LSE? And looking through different possibilities, none of them really describes the range of behaviours I have emitted as consistently and well as ILE does. As such, I think ILE makes most sense, but I can't be 100% sure. So, yeah, not entirely sure. Sorry, just an email just popped up on my screen. Yeah, okay. Cat Passionate. You typed me as EIE based off of my tweets, which is interesting to me because so many people think that I'm an ENTJ raised to P and FP. So I assume at least understand how it looks somewhat. I said the exact same thing here. I could literally use any at my volition. Oh, okay. Yeah. That's true, Cat. I do think you are an EIE. Yeah, based on what you've shown in your tweets, that's true. Okay, guys. It's 11:07 now, so it's exceeded the hour. I got to get going. But thank you very much for contributing your questions, and hopefully you can come back and give me some more questions next month. If any of you have any burning questions, things you really need to go off your chest, things you really need to ask about, I do offer one-to-one Q&As. Although there is that does come at a cost. Which if you message me on Facebook or you send me an email, jackoliveraaron@hotmail.com, then we can get in touch and maybe organise that one-to-one Q&A. Also visit facebook.com, go to World Socionics Society, the page. Then you can also set up and schedule a Q&A with me. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you all have a lovely evening. I'll turn this off.